trained, very good friends of mine who I've gotten to share many, many, many years together with. And as a Christ follower who is white, I've learned a lot from my brothers who are Christ followers who are black. And I believe because of conversations that I have had with these guys, my eyes have been open to things that they never would have been open to if I wouldn't have sat down and had conversation where my desire was to listen and to learn. Not try to prove a point or not try to pretend I know something I don't know. And so what we decided to do together is simply just talk. Like we get to talk all the time together and let you just listen in on. And so we'll see where this goes. We're not really prepared for anything except for just sharing what's in our hearts of what God is teaching us through our lives. Right. So we want to start out, first of all, guys, really asking the question is, what do you guys believe is our God-given responsibility as a church in the way that our hearts should feel right now, in the way that we go about responding to this as Christ followers with what we have seen take place in our country in the last really month, and obviously the whole history of our country, but starting just in our most recent past. Yeah. What would you guys encourage us to really be considering and thinking through right now?
I'll start out and say my heart breaks for everything that's going on right now. It's just, I'm sure, as all of us has watched the news and seen just the reactions and what people are doing, and just the violence and the pain that is being expressed. It's sad. At the end of the day, I think we can all agree it's sad. It's disheartening. It's angering at times, and I think the church. A thought that came to my mind as we were preparing for this and thinking about this is that the church should really be first responders in a situation like this. Because it comes down to, for me, does the church affect the world in a positive way? Does it affect the world for God's glory? And if so, how does that happen? For us, it needs to boil down to loving God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And as when Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, he was questioned, who is my neighbor? And we all know the answer to that. Everyone is my neighbor. So how are we being neighbors, number one, as individuals, as Christians? And how is the church coming together to love God and love people the way he's called us to?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the question we have to ask is, how do we love in this situation? What does love look like? And I know that a lot of people are praying, but I think prayer is where we start. I was in Sunday school, and a dear sister said, the one thing I can do is pray. And I agree with that. Prayer is power. Prayer gives us perspective. Prayer aligns our heart with God's heart. But prayer is not an end. It's a means to an end. Anytime we pray, we're looking for some change. Even as we're praying and pouring our hearts to God, where the end is communion, the end is relationship, the end is being drawn closer to God. But sometimes, a lot of times, prayer should prompt action. Prayer alone is not enough. I mean, imagine if Jesus just prayed for his 3 years in public ministry. Dove came down, he said, all right, I'm going to be in this mountain. I'll see you in 3 years. We would still be all dead in our sins. Right. Prayer is followed by works, good works that the Lord gave us before the foundation of the world, right? So our prayer should be a prompt, and that's exactly how Jesus looked at prayer. Prayer prepared him to preach, to teach, to heal. And so prayer is the beginning, and in our prayers, we need to be asking, I believe, that we should be asking God, what do I do here? Yeah. And what he may be asking you to do is something different than what he may be asking me to do. But there is something for us to do to love like Jesus loved. And so I think we have to not just let the story end. Prayer is just the beginning of our journey, but we should be praying with an open heart of, where is this going to take me, Lord? And I'm open for it, even if it's challenging, even if it's hard. But I know you're with me. I'm going to be the salt and light that I think that we are called to be.
It's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
It's so true. I love what you said about prayer being a prompt, because Jesus did go and he got his marching orders from the Father when he went to pray, and it always led to action for
Always.
sure. Yeah,
Always.
Isn't that crazy? His biggest, when he had the biggest task in front of him, he prayed the longest.
Yes.
And he prayed the most urgently. And I don't know of a more complex and deep crisis
Yes.
than
To
the
pray.
racism that we're facing in our country.
I agree.
In the time that we're living, that man, we need prayer.
Yeah.
But what a great point. So how do you do with that, guys? What would you guys say? What are things that you think, when it comes to being prompted to actions and to attitudes, what are things that Christians can be doing that you guys would say, man, that's helpful to the name of Christ. That's helpful to making steps toward solution. And what would be things that you say, man, guys, that's hurtful. Man, you might mean well, or you might not mean well, but that's just downright hurtful
Yeah.
to the name of Christ. What would be some of those just practical things?
You want to go first?
I think that a couple things. One, we can look at ourselves, do a little bit of self-reflection, and think about, be real with ourselves about the attitudes we may be bringing to the table, unhealthy attitudes we may be bringing to the table. We may harbor racism in our heart, and we can ask the Lord to help us with that. Sometimes we've been raised in racist homes, and it's kind of what we know. But it doesn't mean we have to stay there. So we can take this good, long, hard look at our own lives and say, am I perpetuating racism in my home, in my community, in this country? That's number one. And number two, I think that if we look at Jesus as our model, I always say that Jesus entered into this world and he died here for us. He took on flesh. He lived, he walked in our shoes, so he can relate to us, Hebrew tells us, and he died here for us. And I think we need to start looking at people not as enemies, but with compassion and with empathy, and we can start walking in their shoes and kind of seeing their perspective. And I think Jesus did that all the time. The Bible talks about how he looked and he had compassion on people when he saw people. And so pay attention to how we're looking at people. When we look at them, do we feel compassion, or do we feel that's an enemy of mine, or do we feel that offended by people? But to have a heart of Jesus is to feel compassion. And I think when you put yourself in people's shoes, start feeling what they may be feeling, and then I think that's another way we're prompted to act, because their issues become our issues. It can't be that's their thing. It's a church thing, and it's our thing. As a matter of fact, most of the black people in this country, 80% self-identify as Christian, more than any other group of people in the country. Black people are more likely to pray every day. They're more likely to go to Bible study. They're more likely to go to prayer groups. They are more religious on a whole than any other people in this country. And although it's a small population, I want you to start thinking about, when you see a black person, chances are they are your brother in faith, just by the numbers, right? Doesn't mean they all are.
Yeah.
But we have to start taking this attitude. When we see George Floyd, right, we got to start seeing a brother, right? Our brother, not that's their issue. And when we start to personalize some of these things, it'll change our heart.
That's right.
And I think that's something we need to do.
That's right.
That's my thoughts.
No, I think that's great, and he was a believer, so I could hear. Now, obviously, some would point to, and this might answer part of your question, Joe, some would point to, well, what was he doing, right? He was doing these things that obviously is not a good, upstanding citizen. And I would say, okay, sure. What'd you do yesterday, right? And we have to get away from whataboutism.
Yeah.
Well, what about this, and what about that, and what about that? I think that's one great thing that is good to understand. That could be really offensive.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't. You miss the point. You miss the point of what all the rioting, all the anger, all the angst is all about. There's deep pain.
Yeah.
And as God's people, you become truly God's people when you care about pain.
Yeah.
When you are compassionate, when you are gracious, when you are merciful. This is what should define the Christian. not going on Facebook and railing against everything that you see. If the first thing you're saying is negative, can you be called a Christian, right? And we just need to check ourselves as believers. God, how do I respond to this? The book that we did in men's Bible studies, I've really enjoyed it. I'm trying to remember the chapter, but it talked about, I think, judgmentalism. I think was it. And he had a great answer to judgmentalism, and it was curiosity. Love that. Curiosity kills judgmentalism, because it says, I wonder why they did that. I wonder why they're doing this. And so having a heart to ask questions first rather than accuse first, I think it goes a long way. Long way. And so that is that's what's helpful, is ask questions. I use this in my own personal counseling with people, like for interpersonal relationships. How do I communicate to my spouse or my whatever, this person I'm having an issue with? How do I have two paths I can go down. Number one is the emotionally unhealthy path. The other path is the emotionally healthy path. The emotionally unhealthy path is I come to the table with accusations. I come to the table blaming. I come to the table with a desire for vindication. I want to be right. I want to make sure that my point is getting across, and I want revenge. That's the unhealthy path. The healthy path is you come to the table with questions. When you did this, that really hurt me. Why'd you do that? And you come to the table wanting what? Reconciliation. And that leads to the best path of reconciliation. You want things to be right again. So if you come to the table with accusations and blame, it's just going to be a vicious cycle of pain and hurt, blame, pain, hurt, blame. But if you come to the table with questions, what did I do to offend you? How can I help? How can I change this situation? Because I don't like the situation. That's the best recipe for reconciliation.
What would you guys say that, just let's give the church the benefit of the doubt, which may not be true 100% across the board, but I think as one of the pastors here, I can say, man, people love God,
Yeah.
and they love each other.
Yeah.
And what would you say to them that in this last week and a half, with especially what's happened to George Floyd, they've woken up to something that may have never been so obvious when it comes to just what is going on in our country? What would you guys say? How should they act upon that? How can this be a pivotal time in our lives that we are now being able to see through a different lens that we were not forced to see through before last week? Help us work through that.
Just quickly, I would say, let's not let it go to waste. My fear in all of this is that people are up in arms. We caught this wave of wokeness, across the country, and then it's going to go away. But this has been happening consistently in our community, and for my people, for years. There's never been a time that has not been happening. I mean, I want you to let that sink in. And so what we experience is this collective trauma that we all carry around when it comes to how the systemic racism that we face every single day of our lives. George Floyd was one of countless victims of murder by authority. And we walk around carrying this. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why Martin Luther King famously said, and you heard it over and over again, riot is the language of the unheard. It's what you're seeing is a culmination of hurt and pain being exploded around the country. And we got to look at it for what it is. People hurt, right? And so this is a trauma that we're seeing play out in front of us. And the question is, how do we respond to that with compassion, with love, with care? And how do we come alongside those people that are hurting? But I think we continue to have these types of conversations. I think that I think there's plenty of opportunities to support, those around. As a church, I wonder if there's a way that we could partner with other churches who are dealing with these things every day. We are in this very privileged position, I think, overall as a church, that we don't really have to deal with these things every day. Most of the members of our church, they're thinking about it now, but it's not a part of their reality otherwise. If it's not, they're not blasted on the news with it every day. But how do we continue to make sure this stays a part of the conversation, stays a part of who we are and what we're about? It's probably one of the biggest challenges I think we're going to face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a level of intentionality with it. And there are things that people are going to have to deal with personally in order to engage this whole narrative, this new journey. But I think the very first thing that people will need to do is ask themselves, am I willing to take this journey? Am I willing to go down this road of trying to understand? Because, and again, it comes back to that whataboutism that kind of turns people off. I don't want to go down that road because those are a bunch of thugs. So I don't want to talk about this because look at what they did, right? A person has to come to the table being willing to talk about a difficult situation and to stay in the conversation. No one wants to be in an awkward conversation for long. You know, we want to get out of those situations very quickly, but it's going to be imperative, and I think it's imperative for God's people to have a desire to hear someone's heart, to hear someone's pain, to be empathetic. I like to say that this is a generational thing. When we use words like, or phrases like systemic racism, you got people that have no clue what that means. I've recently myself learned, really come to more of an understanding of what that means. And so I'm black. I would wager it's even more difficult for some white folks to understand what systemic racism is. And so I think we need to clearly define these phrases for people, because if we don't, I think we run the risk of turning them off before we even get a chance to really describe what the issues are. So for anyone in our church who really wants to know, and those are the ones I think we're really trying to reach with this conversation, because that's the heart of God. I personally am not interested in talking to foolishness or talking to a hard heart. That's God's job to soften that heart. I'm praying for, and I want the people who have a heart, which I think a lot of our people do, to hear something that they've maybe not heard before, to stay in a conversation that they don't want to stay in. Because if you have the heart of God, you will want to. And those are the people I'm really interested in talking to. Maybe there's a little bit of my own flesh coming out in that statement, but those are the people I really want to help. If you really want to know, you'll ask, right? If you really want to go further down this road, you'll take the time to hear someone else and what they have to say.
And it takes a bit of humility. It takes a lot of humility, and to be open to maybe being wrong about a thing or two or a position or two. And it takes a lot of courage to even confront that. And it's hard, particularly as we get older and we become set in our ways and our beliefs, to really take a step back and examine the things that our positions, but maybe our positions aren't as godly or Christian as we want to believe they are. And it takes a lot of humility. And the Bible talks often about humility and the role of being humble in the life of a Christian, and the role of, and looking at other people as better than you and deserving more than you. And I think it's a step in humility to take that hard look at yourself and say, I don't have all this figured out.